shining as lights in the night. You know, it's a really beautiful phrase, almost sounds like poetry. But what if it's not just a nice idea? What if it's actually an instruction? In this explainer, we're going to unpack this powerful concept from one single passage that suggests our biggest impact might come not from what we say, but from what we don't say.
And here it is. This is our starting point. This one passage from Philippians. It lays out this incredible challenge and an even bigger promise. It's basically a roadmap for this whole discussion. And if you look closely, you can see the structure. It gives us a command, a context, and this powerful metaphor. So let's start with that metaphor.
So what does it really mean to be a light? I mean, it's a phrase we hear all the time, but the source material we're digging into today, it treats it as way more than just a nice thought. It's presented as a core part of someone's identity, something totally fundamental to who they are.
And this quote from the book of Matthew really drives the point home. Notice it doesn't say, you should try to be the light of the world. It says, you are the light of the world. It's stated like it's a fact, an inherent quality. And just like a city on a hill, it's meant to be seen. This isn't something you're supposed to hide.
But think about it. A light is really only useful when it's dark. So what's the darkness that this light is supposed to be shining in? What's the situation that makes being a light so critical?
Okay, so let's just ask the question directly. What is this darkness? What's the night that we're supposed to be a light in?
Well, the original passage gives us the answer. Straight up, the darkness is described as a crooked and perverse generation. Now, that's some pretty strong language, right? But the source uses it to paint this picture of a world that's kind of lost its way, a society where living differently would stand out in really sharp contrast.
So we know what we're meant to be and where we're meant to be it, but the big question is how? Where does this light even come from? Is it something we can just turn on ourselves through sheer willpower? The source material is very, very clear on this point. Absolutely not.
This slide just lays out the central idea perfectly. On the left, you've got our own efforts, which can get complicated and messy. And on the right, you have a really simple, clear source of light. The text argues that a lot of the time, our own plans and ideas just get in the way. The real light comes from a connection to something outside of ourselves, which it identifies as Jesus. And to make sure we're all on the same page, the source defines its terms. When it talks about the power behind all this, it uses the phrase, the true light. And, as you can see, it directly points to Jesus as this true light, even citing a passage that says, he is the one who gives light to everyone.
This idea gets reinforced with another direct quote right here. So the key takeaway is that an individual's light isn't really their own. It's more like a reflected light, a life that's powered by this primary source. According to the text, it's following this light of the world that keeps a person from walking in darkness. Okay, so this is all great as a big idea, but how do we bring it down to our everyday lives? How does a person actually connect to this source and, shine? Let's look at the practical, step-by-step instructions. The instructions are surprisingly simple, almost shockingly so. It takes us right back to that first passage we looked at. Steps 1 and 2 are about what we say, or maybe what we don't say. No complaining, no arguing. And step 3 is about our mindset, surrendering the ideas that just get in the way. So what's the end result of all this? Well, it's not about putting on a big show for other people. The goal is actually an internal transformation, to become blameless and harmless. In other words, to develop a character that's so consistent and so authentic that it just naturally shines without even having to try.
Okay, so we've talked about how this works on the inside, but what about the outside? What does this shining actually look like to the rest of the world?
Now this is fascinating. The source uses this quote from the much older book of Deuteronomy to make a really interesting point about perception. It suggests that this different way of living, this obedience, doesn't come across as weird or weak to outsiders. Instead, people see it as wisdom and understanding. They look at it and think, wow, there's something different about them. They're wise.
All right, let's do a quick recap of our journey here. We started with the problem, a dark world. We saw the calling, to be a light in that darkness. We learned that the power for that light comes from a central source, not from us. The method is incredibly simple. No complaining, no arguing, and the result? A life that shines with a wisdom that other people can actually see.
And that brings us to our final question, the one I want to leave you with. In a world that is so loud, where it seems like everyone is just fighting to be heard, what if the most powerful thing you could do is be quiet? What if the brightest light you can shine is the one that comes from a life without complaint? It's a pretty radical idea, and definitely one worth thinking about.
There are some verses in the Bible that just stop you in your tracks, right? They can be really confusing. Today, we're going to tackle one of the big ones, a verse about salvation that honestly sounds like an impossible task. So here it is, Philippians 2:12. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Wow. I mean, that just sounds heavy, doesn't it? It feels like this huge weight is being dropped right on our shoulders, like salvation is all up to us. And that verse immediately brings up a huge question. Maybe the question. Does this mean we have to earn our way to heaven? Is it all about our own hard work and effort? That seems off. So let's really dig into this. All right, so first things first, we need to figure out why this verse feels so jarring. What's the deal? Well, it's because it seems to completely contradict a core belief of the Christian faith. And here's the heart of the problem, right? The real tension. How can we be told to work out our salvation if, at the same time, we're told it's a totally free gift from God? It sounds like a puzzle, a real contradiction. And when you put these two verses side by side, you can really see the conflict. In one corner, you've got Philippians telling us to work. And in the other corner, Ephesians says loud and clear that salvation is a gift and it's not from works. So, what gives? Which one is it? Okay, to solve this puzzle, we have to start with a solid foundation. Before we can really get what Paul is saying in Philippians, we need to be absolutely crystal clear on what the rest of the Bible teaches about how salvation works. Context is king. The guy who wrote Philippians, the Apostle Paul, wrote a lot of the New Testament. He's not going to contradict himself. So let's look at his other writings to get the bigger picture. All right, first up, let's look at Romans. Paul writes, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God and are justified by his grace as a gift." Did you catch those key words? By his grace as a gift. This isn't something we earn. It's a gift for people who, let's be honest, fall short. And this next one from Romans really drives it home. It says God showed his love for us while we were still sinners. Think about that. God didn't wait for us to get our act together. He acted first. The initiative, the work, the whole shebang, it comes from him, and only him. So, when we put all these pieces together, the big picture becomes super clear. Salvation is God's work, period. From start to finish. We get absolutely zero credit for it. We can't earn it. In fact, the Bible even says that the very faith we need to believe is also a gift from God. Okay, so now that we have that solid foundation, let's go back to that tricky verse in Philippians. Now that we have the context, we can finally unlock what Paul really means when he says, work out your own salvation. And here's the key, the absolute game changer. It all comes down to one tiny but crucial difference. Paul isn't saying work for your salvation. He's saying work out your salvation. And believe me, those are worlds apart. Think about the order of operations here. It's so important. It doesn't start with us. Step one is God working in us. He changes us from the inside, gives us a new spirit, and even helps our will to want the right things. It's only after that we can begin to work out what he's done on the inside. So you see, we're just expressing on the outside what God has already done on the inside. But what about that fear and trembling part? That sounds scary, right? Well, it's not what you think. This isn't about being scared of getting punished. It's about awe. It's about being in the presence of an all-powerful, holy God and just being completely blown away. It's a deep reverence that makes you take your relationship with him seriously. Okay, so that's the theology, but what does this look like in real life? How do we actually live this out? At the end of the day, working out our salvation is simply this. It's living in a way that shows the change God has already made on the inside. It's about your actions reflecting the new person he's already made you, all because of his free gift. Look, if there's one thing you take away from this, let it be this thought right here. Our good works are the evidence of our salvation, not the cause of it. Think of it like an apple tree. A healthy tree doesn't strain and work hard for apples. It just grows apples because that's what it is. In the same way, our good works aren't what save us. They're the natural fruit that grows out of the new life God has already given us. So this all leaves us with a really practical question to chew on. We know God is at work in you. The question for you is, how does your old nature, your fallen nature, fight back against that? And what can you do to resist that pull and actively partner with what he's already doing inside you?
Hey everyone, so today we're going to jump into a really powerful idea from the book of Philippians. What does it actually mean to be a light in a world that, let's be honest, can feel pretty dark sometimes? We're going to break down just a few short verses that pack a massive punch. And you might be really surprised where the whole thing starts.
So you might think becoming a light is, some huge, complicated spiritual thing. But the text we're looking at today says, nope, it all begins with something incredibly practical and close to home, how we actually deal with each other. And here it is, plain as day. The Apostle Paul lays down this command that is just so simple, but wow, is it a challenge? Do all things without complaining and disputing. And get this isn't just a friendly tip for being polite. This is presented as the absolute bedrock for everything else he's about to say. And that's why this whole no complaining thing is so serious. Unity in a community, it turns out, is super fragile. It's not the default setting. It takes real, hard work to keep it together. And this command, well, is presented as totally non-negotiable for that effort. So here's the kicker. We can't just force unity by, trying really hard to get along. The text says it's actually a byproduct. It's something that grows out of two deeper things. First, our connection with Christ, and second, actually doing what he says. It's an inside-out job, not the other way around. Okay, so once we've got that internal stuff sorted out, or at least we're working on it, Paul completely shifts gears to the external purpose. It's almost like he's saying, look, you can't be a bright light for the world if your own house is a mess of complaining and division. And to explain this, he uses this absolutely incredible metaphor.
And this is it. This is the heart of the whole passage. After dealing with the grumbling and the arguing, he says the goal is to shine as lights in the world. It's a call to be a beacon, right? Something that really stands out. But how do we actually do that?
To get us there, the source material paints this amazing picture. Just imagine, you're out in the middle of nowhere, miles from any city lights. It's a moonless night, and the sky is just pitch black.
And what happens on a night like that? Well, the stars just pop, don't they? They shine so much more brightly. And that's the whole point. It's the intense darkness that actually reveals the light. It doesn't put it out. It makes it stand out.
Okay, so let's take that idea and apply it. The moral darkness of the world, that's our pitch black sky. And our witness, the different way we're supposed to live our lives, that's the star. The argument here is that the darker things get around us, the more obvious, the more distinct our light should become.
And that leads to a pretty tough question for all of us, right? What happens when we get too close to the artificial lights of the city? The constant pressure of worldly ideas and all that noise. Does our own light start to look a little dim? Do we start to blend in, losing that powerful contrast? All right, so if we're supposed to shine and have this contrast, what does that light actually look like? What's it made of? Well, Paul doesn't just leave us hanging. He actually breaks it down for us, giving us the anatomy of a shining light. First up, he says we're to be blameless. Now, that doesn't mean perfect, but it means you're without reproach, you're faultless in your integrity. And the example given is Job. I mean, think about that. This is a guy who held it together not just when things were good, but when he lost literally everything. That's the kind of tough, resilient character we're talking about.
Next, we've got harmless. And the original Greek word here is pretty cool. It literally means unmixed or pure. There's no hidden agenda, no secret motive. It's pure through and through. It's exactly what Jesus was getting at when he told his followers to be as harmless as doves, a kind of pure, simple innocence. So, okay, how in the world do you stay pure and unmixed in today's world? Well, the source points to this really practical rule from King David. I will set no wicked thing before mine eyes. Man, in an age where we're just bombarded by media 24/7, that becomes a super powerful filter, doesn't it? It's about consciously choosing what we let in to protect that character.
Okay, so we know what we're supposed to be, blameless, harmless, but what are we supposed to actually do? How do we make this happen? Well, the text gives us a really clear two-part game plan for how to shine. And here it is. It's a two-step process. Step one, you have to actively reject the pressure to conform, to just blend in with the world around you. And step two, at the same exact time, you have to grab onto something else with all your might, the word of life. So you're pushing one thing away while pulling another thing closer. And that first step, not conforming, is so important that Paul brings it up in other places too. The goal is not to fit in. The whole point is that our faith should make us stand out, creating that incredible contrast we were just talking about, like a star in a dark sky. And listen, the stakes here are crazy high. Our little choices every single day, the choice to blend in or the choice to hold on tight to something different, they actually determine if our lives have this ultimate meaning, looking toward the day of Christ, or if we get to the end and realize we've just been running in vain. It's about purpose. So, we've looked at the command, we've unpacked that beautiful star metaphor, and we've walked through the method. And now, as we wrap this up, the focus shifts. It's no longer just about the ancient text, it's about us, right here, right now. It's time for a little personal reflection. And we're going to end on a question that, honestly, doesn't have a simple answer. It takes everything we've just talked about, being a pure, distinct, shining light, and it brings it right into your life. So the question is this: if there are parts of your life that feel a little too worldly, a little too blended in, how can you start to clean that up? Where can your light shine just a little bit brighter? That's a big one to think of. Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to dig into this really powerful and honestly kind of strange idea of sacrifice. We're going to unpack this ancient metaphor that reframes a person's whole life and even their death, not as some tragic ending, but as a final, beautiful offering. Okay, let's get into it. So let's just start with the central mystery. What on earth does it mean to be poured out as a drink offering? It sounds super dramatic, right? Maybe a little bizarre, but this phrase actually comes from a real historical figure who was facing the very end of his life. So this line, it comes directly from the Apostle Paul. And in what a lot of people think was one of his very last letters, this is how he describes his own impending death. Notice he doesn't sound scared. There's no regret. Instead, he sees the end of his life as this profound final act, a pouring out. To really get what he meant, we've got to go back in time. To unlock this phrase, we have to understand an ancient ritual that was super common in Paul's world and for centuries before it. We're talking about the practice of libations. A libation is, at its core, pretty simple. It's the act of pouring out a liquid as an offering. It was a physical, tangible way for people to show their devotion, to give something valuable back to a higher power. And we're not talking about just any liquid. This was often valuable stuff, like good wine or precious oil. Or in a desert land, even water was a huge deal. These were things with real substance and worth, and they were literally poured out onto the earth or an altar. Now, if you were just an outsider looking in, you might think, what a total waste, right? Pouring expensive wine on the ground. It kind of reminds you of that story of Mary who poured an entire jar of incredibly expensive perfume all over Jesus' feet. To some people there, it looked wasteful, but it was really this enormous sacrifice, a picture of pure, uncalculated devotion. Okay, so with that background on libations in mind, let's circle back to what Paul said, because now we can start to peel back the layers of meaning in his words. Now, here's the crucial detail, the part that changes everything. In the Hebrew tradition that Paul was completely steeped in, a drink offering, a libation, it wasn't the main event, not even close. It was the finishing touch. It was something you poured over or alongside a bigger, more substantial sacrifice. So this distinction is everything. A libation wasn't a complete sacrifice all by itself. No, it was the final, fitting addition that completed a sacrifice that had already been given. Paul didn't see his life as the main event over there in the first column. He saw it as what's in that second column, the complementary offering. And this just brilliantly shows his entire mindset. Paul saw his own death, his potential execution, not as his own personal tragedy, but as the final pour, the perfect complement to the sacrifice and service already being offered by the community of believers in Philippi that he loved so much. His life was the wine being poured over their offering. You see how this shifts the focus in a huge way? It suddenly wasn't just about Paul's death. It was all about the community's life, which was its own kind of sacrifice. I mean, Paul had taught this very idea himself. He had urged people to present their bodies, their whole lives, their entire existence as a living sacrifice. Now, think about that. This isn't a sacrifice that ends in death, but one that you live out every single day. And for them, this wasn't just some nice-sounding idea. They were actually living it out in very real, very tangible ways.
They were going from house to house. They were opening up their own homes for others to come in and study. They were constantly explaining what they believed, and doing all of this often at great personal risk. So their entire collective life of service, all the time, the energy, the risk, the resources, that was the main sacrifice on the altar. Paul saw his own life as simply the final, consecrating drink offering being poured right on top of their incredible, ongoing, living sacrifice. So this ancient idea, this powerful image of a life poured out, well, it's not just a history lesson. It actually poses a very direct challenge to us, right here, right now. The source material asks this question so bluntly. If they, at great personal cost, gave their lives as this living sacrifice for what they believed in, should we do any less? It's one of those questions that really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? And that really brings us to the final thought for today. What does it mean for your life to be a living sacrifice? Not as some morbid ending, but as a life poured out in service of something bigger than yourself. It's an ancient question for sure, but it has a very modern and very personal answer. Thanks for joining me. You know, what does it really mean to be a reliable person? It's something we all want to be and something we look for in others. But it's not about what someone says they'll do, it's about what they've been through. So today we're diving into this idea of proven character, a kind of strength that's forged in the fire, not just talked about. Now, seriously, think about it for a second. When the chips are down and everything's on the line, who is that person? The one you can call, no questions asked, and you just know they'll be there. For most of us, that's a pretty short list, right? Well, let's break down what actually makes someone worthy of that kind of trust. To really get a handle on this, we're going to look at a fascinating historical example. Picture this. The Apostle Paul needs to send someone to a community he deeply cares about in a place called Philippi. He can't just send anyone. He needs someone he trusts, like 100%. And his choice? A man named Timothy. And let me tell you, Timothy was no rookie. I mean, look at this track record. He wasn't just some guy tagging along. He was co-writing important letters, leading tough missions on his own, and working right there, shoulder to shoulder with Paul in some really challenging cities. The guy was clearly competent, he was experienced, he had the skills. But it went so much deeper than just being good at the job. Paul called Timothy like-minded, and this is where it gets really cool. The original Greek word here literally means equal in soul. Just think about that. This wasn't just a business partner. This was someone who was on the exact same wavelength, someone who cared about things with the same heart and soul as Paul did. So what was the secret sauce? What was that one thing that made Timothy the go-to guy? It wasn't just his resume, and it wasn't just that they got along. Paul pointed to one very specific quality, and that quality, well, that's the secret ingredient we're talking about today. And here it is. Paul called it his proven character. The Greek word is dokime. And this is so important. It doesn't mean someone who is perfect or has never failed. It means someone who has been tested, who's been through the fire of real-world trials and has come out the other side showing that their character is the real deal. It's a quality that is earned, never just given. And that leads us to a huge idea. If character has to be proven, then it needs a proving ground, right? It needs a place to be tested. The source material we're looking at suggests that life's difficulties, the tough stuff, aren't just random. They are the very places where our inner strength, our mettle, is actually forged and revealed. It really boils down to this simple but incredibly profound statement. Life is disciplinary. Think about that. It means that life itself, with all its messy, complicated, beautiful, and difficult parts, is designed to train us, to shape us. It's not just chaos, it's more like a classroom or a gym for our character. And this quote from our source just nails it. It says, there will be provocations to test the temper. You know what that is? That's your flight getting canceled. That's someone cutting you off in traffic. That's a frustrating comment online. These little annoyances are actually pop quizzes for our character. And how we respond to them, that right spirit, is exactly how those positive traits get built. Okay, so if life is the test, how do we pass? I mean, how do we actually get an A+ in the school of hardship? The source material says it's all about developing a right spirit. That sounds great, but what does it actually look like in the real world? Well, here it is, broken down into 3 pretty clear steps. And let's be clear, this isn't about being a doormat. It's about a kind of radical, quiet strength. It's about bearing insults without snapping back. It's about meeting harshness with gentleness, and even meeting oppressive actions with proactive kindness. That is the right spirit in action. The source material paints this picture of two different paths you can take. When hardship hits, one person just sort of grits their teeth and gets through it. But on the inside, nothing really changes. The other person engages with the hardship using that right spirit, and that's where the transformation happens. It's the response that makes all the difference and develops character. And in the specific language of our source, this is what distinguishes the Christian from the world. All right, let's bring this all home. Let's make it personal. Because this isn't just a history lesson about Timothy. This is about reframing the way you and I see the struggles in our own lives right now. So I want you to take a second and actually do this. Think of one specific thing that's been a challenge for you lately. Could be something big, could be something small. A tough conversation, a frustrating project at work, an annoying neighbor. Just get one thing in your mind. You got it? Okay, now that you have that situation in your head, let's ask the hard question, using the words from our source. How did you handle it? Was it meekly borne? Was it well endured? Now, this isn't about feeling guilty. It's just about taking an honest look at our default reactions. And now for the most important part, the forward-looking part. What can you do differently next time a similar challenge pops up? How could you reframe it? Not as a pain you have to put up with, but as a chance to practice, to become more disciplined, to become a little more like the person you actually want to be. So we'll end on this one last thought to chew on. What if we completely flipped the script? What if every challenge, every frustration, every single hardship wasn't a setback at all, but was actually an invitation, a chance to step up and forge that genuine, reliable, proven character we've been talking about? What would change if we saw life that way?
All right, today we're jumping into a really fascinating command from a letter that's, 2,000 years old. The command is simple: hold such men in esteem. So the question is, who is this man they're talking about? And what on earth did he do to get that kind of praise? Let's figure it out.
So, the guy at the center of all this, his name is Epaphroditus. And look, if you're thinking, I've never heard of him, don't worry, you are definitely not alone. He's kind of this mystery man, a background character who gets just this tiny mention in the book of Philippians. So that's our whole mission today. Who was this guy, and why was he secretly so important?
Okay, so let's basically play a detective here. We're going to start piecing together the clues about who this man was, starting with the very few facts we actually have.
So, our first clues are actually hiding in plain sight. First off, Epaphroditus only shows up in this one single letter. That's it. And his name? Well, it's linked to Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love. That's a pretty big hint that he probably came from a pagan background before he converted, which, was a pretty common story back then.
But here's where it gets really interesting. This is the real puzzle. The Apostle Paul, who's writing this letter from a Roman prison, mind you, doesn't just give him a shout-out. No, he insists that the church hold this guy in the highest possible regard. I mean, for someone we barely know anything about, that is a massive endorsement. So you gotta ask, why? What did this Epaphroditus guy do to earn that?
Okay, so our next set of clues are kind of hidden in the specific words Paul uses to describe him. And trust me, these aren't just boring job titles. They're like little windows that let us see right into his character.
First up, Paul calls him a fellow worker. Now, that might not sound like a big deal, but it's not just a casual compliment. It tells us he was a really active, hands-on partner in the ministry. He was someone who was right there in the trenches, probably working shoulder to shoulder with Paul. And then the description gets even more intense. Paul calls him a fellow soldier. I mean, that language paints a really vivid picture, right? It tells you there was conflict. Trying to spread a new faith in the Roman Empire, well, that was often a dangerous battle. So this title tells us Epaphroditus was brave, that he was someone who absolutely did not back down when things got tough.
And finally, get this. He's called a messenger, but the Greek word here is apostolos, which is the same root word we get apostle from. So what does that mean? It means he wasn't just some delivery guy. Oh no. He was an official, trusted representative, someone his entire community appointed for a mission that was absolutely crucial.
So, let's recap. A worker, a soldier, and a trusted messenger. Pretty impressive, right? But what was this high-stakes mission he was sent on? Because this is where the story gets really dramatic.
Okay, to really get the danger here, you've got to understand what Roman prisons were like. They weren't anything like what we have today. They weren't state-funded. Prisoners had to pay for literally everything themselves: food, clothes, even just a blanket. Your survival completely depended on friends and family on the outside bringing you what you needed. If you didn't have that support, well, your situation was beyond dire.
And this is where you see just how high the stakes were. The church in Philippi entrusted Epaphroditus with money to take to Paul. So he travels all the way to Rome, he delivers the aid, he starts taking care of Paul in prison. But in the middle of all of this, he gets sick. So sick that he almost died. He literally risked his own life for this mission. And after he finally recovered, he was the guy who carried Paul's letter, the very letter we're talking about, all the way back home.
So that incredible sacrifice, that's exactly why Paul tells the church they have to honor this man. But what does that word esteem actually mean in this context? Because it's a concept that pretty much flips the world's values completely upside down.
See, in the Roman world, honor was simple. It was all about how much money you had and what your social status was. But the kind of esteem Paul is talking about here, it's completely different. It has nothing to do with wealth. It's based on a spirit of sacrifice, on following the example of Jesus, who always put others first.
And the specific Greek word that Paul chose here is really powerful. It means to value highly or even to consider precious. So we're not just talking about basic respect. It's about looking at someone and recognizing their immense worth, not because of what they have, but because of their character and their selfless actions.
And just think about the company this word puts them in. This same exact term is only used a few other times in the New Testament. It's used to describe a Roman centurion's highly valued servant, the honored guests at a big feast, and even Jesus himself, who's called the precious cornerstone of the faith. Wow. To be placed in that same category, that is a really profound statement.
So, okay, great story. But why does this ancient tale about a guy most of us have never heard of, why does it matter to us, right here, right now? Well, it's because his example is absolutely timeless.
When you think about it, the legacy of Epaphroditus isn't about power or fame or getting his name in lights. He represents something so much quieter, but honestly, way more profound. It's a legacy of just faithful, sacrificial service. He's really a model for all the people who work behind the scenes, you know? The ones taking risks, not for their own glory, but for the good of other people.
And really, that leaves all of us with a final question to think about. His story is a challenge, right? It challenges us to look around our own lives and ask ourselves, who are the unsung heroes in my life? The workers, the soldiers, the messengers in my world, that maybe, just maybe, I'm called to hold in esteem?
So what really is the ultimate test of faith? Today, we're going to dive into a text that suggests it's not just one single moment, but actually a lifetime of choices. We're going to look at what self-sacrificing love really is, the kinds of pressures that can pull us off track, and what it truly means to answer a higher calling when everything is on the line. Let's get into it.
All right, here's the game plan. We'll kick things off with this radical idea of self-sacrificing love. Then, we'll face this prediction of a coming test that's going to challenge, well, everything. We'll also break down the subtle ways we get pressured to conform, figure out what it really means to honor a higher power, and finally, we're going to tackle that really tricky relationship between our faith and our actions.
So let's start at the very foundation of this whole conversation, this spirit of self-sacrificing love. The source material we're looking at presents this as way more than just an emotion. It's actually the ultimate measure of your spiritual commitment.
I mean, this quote really frames it, doesn't it? It suggests our spiritual depth is basically measured by our capacity for this kind of love. But what does that even mean, to drink deeply of this spirit? What does that look like day to day? This right here really breaks it down. This kind of love isn't just a warm, fuzzy feeling. It's a whole way of being. It's a love that is humble, it's selfless, it's patient, and it's forgiving. And ultimately, it's the kind of love that can move us to give literally everything we have for someone else's sake. But here's the thing. This ideal of love isn't just some beautiful, abstract concept. According to our source, it is about to be put to the ultimate test, a test that's going to determine the fate of every single soul. And the text doesn't pull any punches here. It speaks very directly about a future time of trial, and it centers around something it calls the mark of the beast, which is presented as a symbol of allegiance to worldly powers. And this is going to force a decision on every single person with eternal consequences. You can really see the two paths laid out here, can't you? On one side, you've got the path of conformity. of just yielding to the world to avoid pain and trouble. And on the other, you have the path of faith, staying true to what you believe no matter the cost. It really boils down to a choice between a comfortable lie and a difficult truth. So let's dig into that first path a little more. What does it actually mean to yield to the world? The source material frames this whole thing with a very sharp question. And this question gets right to the heart of it. See, it's probably not about one single dramatic moment of betrayal. It's about the 1,000 tiny compromises we might make every day. So what are those worldly demands that can slowly, almost without us noticing, pull us away from what we know is right? And here's a really crucial warning from the text. Yielding is a gradual process. It starts small, with little compromises, just conforming to customs that don't seem like a big deal. But every small step away from our convictions just makes the next one that much easier. And this isn't just a threat for individuals, it's a danger for entire communities of faith. Okay, so we've talked about what to avoid. Now let's flip that coin and talk about what to actively embrace. This next section is all about the positive action of faith, the principle of honoring God. And this brings up another really interesting question from our source. It asks us to think about how we honor God and whether that's the exact same thing as giving him glory. It's a subtle difference, but a really important one. I love this because it points to this beautiful two-way relationship with the divine. It's not a one-way street. When we honor God, God honors us. It's a relationship built on this idea of mutual respect and love. So this helps us see the difference a little more clearly. Honoring God seems to be about a foundational principle of reverence that shapes how you live your life. Giving glory, though, is presented as more of an explicit act, praising and acknowledging him. They're definitely related, but they're different sides of the same coin. All right, this brings us to our final section, and honestly, it might be the trickiest one to wrap our heads around. If salvation is a free gift, then what's our part in it? How do we live a life of faith without falling into that trap of thinking we can somehow earn our way to heaven? You know, this is a tension people of faith have wrestled with forever. If salvation is a gift, what in the world does it mean to work it out? And how do you do that without accidentally thinking your actions are what's saving you? Okay, so before we go any further, let's just make sure we're on the same page with this word legalism. Basically, it's the idea that we can earn God's favor by just following a set of rules. It's kind of like trying to buy a gift that's already been given to you for free. It turns a relationship of love into a sterile business transaction. And what's so fascinating is how the source text answers this. It's not with some complicated theological argument. Instead, it describes this powerful, deep transformation that happens to people during that great test we talked about earlier. The source suggests that in that moment of crisis, a fire is lit inside the faithful. People who were once shy and hesitant will find this brand new courage, a new voice to declare their faith for all to hear. I mean, just think about that for a second. The weakest, most hesitant people will become like David, the shepherd boy who took on a giant. It's a complete reversal, a miracle of courage born right in the middle of the storm. And the text builds this all up to a really beautiful, poetic climax. It sets up this incredible contrast, starting with a moment of greatest hardship, and then resolves it with this stunning image of hope. You see, the answer to that whole legalism question isn't about perfectly following rules. It's about a relationship so deep and real that it literally transforms us under pressure. Our character isn't just tested, it's forged in the fire. So let's do a quick recap. We've seen that true devotion is really defined by a radical, selfless kind of love. We know a critical test is coming that will force the choice between just conforming and having authentic faith. We've also seen that honoring God is an active principle, not a legalistic checklist. And maybe most importantly, that it's in the toughest times that the most amazing strength is often revealed. And that leaves us with one final, very personal question to chew on. The text suggests that the path we end up taking in that final test is actually determined by the small choices we're making every single day. So which path are you on right now? Which path are you preparing for?
All right, let's get right into this one. We're going to talk about a man from the Solomon Islands whose name, well, it wasn't just a name. It was more like a prophecy. It means no devil strings. And his entire life became this incredible story of proving that you can, in fact, break free from the invisible things that hold you back in fear.
So our story starts in the Maravo Lagoon. And you have to picture this place. It's not some simple island paradise.
Back at the turn of the 20th century, the people there were known for being pretty warlike, and their entire world was governed by this constant, paralyzing fear of evil spirits.
And that fear, you could actually see it. It had a physical form they called devil strings. These were basically special vines that you had to tie to the front of your canoe before you went fishing. The belief was absolute. You do this, you appease the spirits. You don't, your trip is a failure, or worse. It was the ultimate symbol of the superstition that had a total grip on everyone's life.
But then one guy, a chief named Tatagu, starts to have his doubts. Around 1902, he does something completely unthinkable. He gets his canoe, he goes out to fish, and he deliberately leaves the devil's string behind. I mean, can you imagine? It was this quiet act of rebellion, but a massive challenge to a tradition that had been around for generations.
So what happens? Do the spirits get him? Nope. In fact, his trip was a huge success. He comes back with an incredible catch of fish, only to find out there's even better news waiting for him at home. His wife had just given birth to a son. And in that moment, feeling victorious over fear, he gives his son a name that would literally define his destiny, Kata Rogogoso, which of course means no devil strings.
So, with a name like that, you know this kid is already on a pretty interesting path. But his life's true direction, well, that would become clear when a strange white boat sails into the lagoon. And it wasn't a threat. It turned out to be a profound opportunity.
Okay, so let's just quickly run through how his early life unfolds. He's born in 1902. Then, when he's 12, a mission boat arrives. Now, these weren't the slavers the islanders feared. They just wanted to build a school. And Catarigoso, he becomes one of the very first students. A few years later, he's one of the first to be baptized. And by 1935, he's ordained as an Adventist minister. You can see he was a trailblazer right from the very beginning.
So for decades, there's peace. He's building his community, but the rest of the world is on fire with war. And that global conflict, World War II, was about to come crashing onto the shores of the Solomon Islands, bringing with it the ultimate test of Cataragosa's faith.
When the Japanese army invades, they see him as a local leader they can control. So they give him this horrifying order. To prove his loyalty, he had to kill any Allied personnel or any person with white skin he found. Just think about that. It was a command to completely betray everything he had built his life on.
His response? It was immediate. No hesitation. Just incredibly brave. He looked the officer right in the eye and said, "I would rather obey God than man." He knew exactly what saying that would cost him. He absolutely knew, and he said it anyway.
And yeah, the consequences were exactly as brutal as you'd expect. He was arrested, interrogated, and beaten badly. Then he was sentenced to die by firing squad. The very life that began as an act of courage was now supposed to end because of one. Okay, and this is where the story just takes a turn you can hardly believe. The officer lines up the firing squad. He tells them to fire on his count. He starts 1, 2, but when he goes to shout 3, nothing. The word just wouldn't come out. He was physically unable to give the command. He tries again, and again, and again, and finally, just completely baffled and frustrated, he gives up.
10 days later, he manages to escape from prison. So what do you think he does? Run and hide? No way. That near-death experience didn't break him. Instead, it lit a fire under him for an even more dangerous mission. He went from being the victim to being the rescuer.
So for the rest of the war, the man they sentenced to death for refusing to kill, well, he dedicated himself to saving lives. And this number just shows you the scale of what he did. He organized and led this whole rescue operation that saved a total of 214 Allied personnel.
And that number isn't just some abstract statistic. Let's break it down. We're talking about 27 American pilots who'd been shot down. We're talking about 187 Australian and New Zealand soldiers. All of them, every single one, owed their life to this one man's conviction. His stand wasn't just a personal belief anymore. It had become this massive, life-saving action.
So after the war, Cataragoso's work, it just kept going. The courage he showed in that one moment, it just kept rippling outward, creating this legacy that would completely transform his entire community for generations to come.
I mean, just look at this comparison. The before and after is staggering. In his own lifetime, he saw the people of Morovo go from being known as this warlike, cannibalistic community that was totally ruled by fear to becoming known for their mercy and their faith. The devil's strings were well and truly cut. He passed away in 1964 at the age of 62. 37 of those years were spent in dedicated service. His life literally started with a symbolic name, and it ended with a transformed, tangible reality for his people.
And really, that leaves us with this final thought. His story was about actual vines on a canoe, sure, but it's about something so much bigger, isn't it? It kind of forces us to ask ourselves, what are the invisible devil strings in our own lives? You know, the fears, the traditions, the assumptions that hold us back. And what would it take for us to finally cut them?
Have you ever really thought about that phrase, the light of the world? It's a huge, powerful statement. But what does it actually mean for us day to day? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break down that exact metaphor. We'll dig into where it comes from, what its purpose is, and how it's supposed to shape our lives. Okay, so to really get why being a light is such a big deal, you first have to understand the setting. The source material paints this really stark picture of the world. It's not just a little dim, it's completely engulfed in darkness. And that's not just dramatic scenery, it's a world that is desperately in need of some hope. And then right into that darkness comes this incredible declaration. You are the light of the world. Think about that. It's not a question, it's not a suggestion, it's a statement about who you are. It's this immediate call to action, a direct challenge to shine right in the face of all that shadow. So that brings us to the big question, right? What does it actually mean to be a light? Is it about having a certain feeling or doing specific things? The source material we're looking at gives us a surprisingly clear roadmap, and it breaks this massive idea down into a practical journey. So here's our roadmap for understanding this call. It's a journey, really, and it comes in 3 parts. We're going to start with where the light even comes from, then we'll look at its mission, and finally we'll see how it's made stronger. It's this cool path from inner power to outer impact. So first up, powering the light. Think of this as the engine room. Then, shining the light, what are we supposed to do with it? And finally, forging the light, which is all about how challenges actually make it brighter. All right, let's dive into part 1, the source. Where does this light get its power? Is it something we're supposed to just, muster up on our own? Or is there something deeper going on? And that's a really important question. And the answer is so interesting. It's not about just gritting your teeth and trying harder. Instead, the source points to this amazing partnership between our own efforts and a divine power source. The power behind this light is all about the dynamic relationship between our faith and our actions, our works. They're not separate things. They're like 2 gears that are designed to turn together, perfectly in sync. And the book of Philippians really lays out the blueprint for how this works. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. You see, our role is to work it out, to live it, to practice it, to actually do it. But we're not doing it alone. That action is fueled by God's role, which works it into us. It's like having this internal power source that makes all the external action possible. Okay, so now that we have a handle on the power source, let's talk about the purpose. What's the mission of this light? What's it all for? What is it supposed to actually do in the world? Well, the mission is incredibly practical. It's about following in the footsteps of Jesus, and it's very relational. It's about sharing our actual lives with other people. It's about continuing that mission of being a light. You see, at its heart, this light is a missionary symbol. It was never meant to be hidden away. It's meant to be seen and shared. Now, of course, no real journey is ever a straight line, right? There are always going to be challenges. But what if those obstacles, those hard times, weren't just things to get through? What if they were actually a crucial part of the process, the very fire that forges the light? So here's the key takeaway. Trials and hardships are presented as God's tools, not as punishments, not as random bad luck, but as purposeful instruments used to develop the qualities that are absolutely essential for the mission to actually work. So far from putting the light out, these challenges are actually what temper it. It's like forging a sword. The fire and the hammer make the metal stronger, tougher, more resilient. This whole process prepares us for the work ahead, making sure our light doesn't just flicker out in a storm, but actually shines even brighter because of it. This call to be a light, one that's forged in the fire of trials, it's not some new idea. It's actually part of this grand, sweeping story that's been unfolding for thousands of years. It's a legacy that we're being invited to step into. And this timeline just shows that progression so beautifully. It starts way back as a prophecy, a promise of a light that was coming. Then that promise is embodied in the person of Jesus.
And then, and this is the amazing part, the torch gets passed to the church, to us, tasked with carrying that exact same light into the world today. And this prophecy from Isaiah, man, it's really the bedrock for this whole thing. It gives so much weight and significance to the call. This isn't just a nice metaphor. It is a legacy, handed down through generations. And now, it's our turn to carry it. So we've seen that this light is divinely powered. It's driven by a mission, it's forged and strengthened through trials, and it's part of this incredible, timeless legacy, which really leaves us with one final, very personal question. What is your light for? So, what matters more? What you believe deep down in your heart, or what you actually do? You know, it's a question that has been right at the center of Christian thought for, well, thousands of years. Today, we're going to try and unravel this puzzle using one really simple but powerful idea: light. To get us started, I want to share a pretty dramatic story. It just perfectly sets the scene for everything we're about to unpack. So picture this: a storm-battered rocky coast, and a single lighthouse, the only thing responsible for guiding ships to safety. Can you just imagine that scene? The machinery just grinds to a halt. The massive light, the one and only guide for ships out there in a raging storm, it just stops turning. Now, the keepers knew that a fixed light could actually be a false signal, It could lure ships right to their doom on the rocks. So they did the only thing they could. All night long, they manually pushed that heavy, hot lamp just to keep its life-saving beam moving. Their work was exhausting, absolutely, but it was essential. And that story, it's a perfect illustration of what we're talking about. See, faith, a lot like that lighthouse beam, isn't meant to be some static internal feeling. Jesus taught that it's our actions, our good works, that make our faith visible and, effective in the world. Just like the keeper's effort made the light useful, it's our works that give real substance to what we believe. This brings us right to a debate that has echoed through church history for centuries. Is it faith alone that saves you, or do our actions play a part? It's a real puzzle, one that theologians have wrestled with forever, and we're going to break it down. I love this quote from C.S. Lewis. You can almost feel the intellectual curiosity in it, right? He looked at what the Bible says on this, and he saw what looks like a contradiction. But instead of getting frustrated, he was fascinated. He saw it for what it was, one of those deep, profound paradoxes that often lie right at the heart of faith. And here it is. This is the exact sentence that sparked Lewis's curiosity. On one side, the Apostle Paul tells us to work out your own salvation, which, let's be honest, makes it sound like the responsibility is 100% ours. But then, in the very next breath, he says, "For it is God who works in you." And that seems to imply that we're just passive, that God does it all. So, which is it? Well, the solution is actually pretty beautiful. The Bible makes it clear that our works don't earn us salvation. No way. Instead, they are the evidence, the proof that our faith is real and alive. The book of James puts it really bluntly. Faith without works isn't really faith at all. He calls it dead and useless. Paul adds another layer here when he tells believers to work out their salvation with fear and trembling. Now, hold on, this doesn't mean we should be terrified or constantly anxious. Not at all. Instead, it points to a profound sense of responsibility. It's all about taking the gift of salvation seriously and being accountable for how we actually live it out. And scholars have really dug into the depth of this phrase. For some, it points to a healthy concern about, failing in our mission. For others, it's more about an attitude of humble submission to God, or maybe just a deep sense of duty. But the common thread through all of it is this serious, respectful approach to our faith in action. So, how do we actually live this out? Well, the Bible repeatedly comes back to our guiding metaphor. We are called to shine as lights. The starting point for this whole idea is God himself. Back in the Old Testament, the psalmist makes this powerful declaration: "The Lord is my light. All light begins with him, period." Then, that light is given a purpose. The prophet Isaiah describes God's servant as a light to the Gentiles, which means a beacon of salvation for all the nations of the world. The light is meant to spread out. And then you get to the New Testament, and something incredible happens. The torch is passed. The mission is given directly to believers. We become the ones called to shine as lights in the world, carrying that divine message of hope. But there's a crucial twist here. This is not a solo mission. Paul really emphasizes that our light is most powerful when we are united. I mean, think about it. A single lantern versus an entire city just ablaze with light. That's the kind of power a community has when it's shining together. So what does this actually look like in a person's life? The Bible gives us some incredible real-life examples. Let's look at two men who were praised for being living, breathing portraits of dedicated service. First, we meet Timothy. Paul paints this picture of a man who was a true partner, someone who genuinely put the needs of others and the mission ahead of himself. His character wasn't just talk, it had been tested and proven time and again. He just embodied an attitude of service. And then there's Epaphroditus. Wow. His dedication was legendary. Paul calls him a brother, a worker, and a soldier. These are terms of deep, deep loyalty. This was a man so committed that he risked his own life for the mission, and it was all driven by a profound love for the people he served. When you look at these portraits in service, it leads us right to our final takeaway, the call to give your absolute best. The common thread in the lives of these two men is total dedication. They held nothing back. And their stories, they're not just ancient history. They're a challenge to us right now. They show us what it looks like to pour everything you have into making your faith visible through your actions. And so we end right back where we began, with that simple yet profound image of light. All the history, all the theology, it all points to this one final personal question. In your life, in your work, in your community, how will you let your light shine?
Hey everyone! Today we're going to tackle a question that can get, well, a little confusing sometimes. What is the real relationship between salvation and good works? We're going to connect the dots and see exactly how these two powerful ideas are meant to fit together.
So, this is really the heart of the matter, isn't it? If salvation is a totally free gift, no strings attached, then where do good works fit into the picture? It can feel like a real contradiction. On one hand, it's a gift. On the other, we're told to do good things. Are these ideas fighting each other? Or is there a much deeper connection that we might be missing? Let's find out.
Okay, here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we're going to start with the foundation, the gift of salvation. From there, we'll see how that gift leads to action, in from faith to works. Then, we'll look at the impact of those actions with shining a light, and we'll wrap it all up with a call to action.
Let's dive into part 1, the gift of salvation. See, before we can build a bridge to good works, we have to make absolutely sure that our foundation is solid. So, what exactly is salvation? The single most important word to grab onto here is gift. It's not a paycheck. It's not something we earn by being good enough. According to the source material, it's something you receive purely through faith. And that one idea completely changes the dynamic. It's not about what we do, it's about what we receive.
And look, this isn't just someone's opinion. It's stated so explicitly right here by the Apostle Paul. He really leaves no wiggle room, emphasizing that salvation is the gift of God. This one verse is absolutely crucial because it just completely removes our own efforts from the equation of being saved.
Living by faith isn't a one-and-done kind of thing. It's a journey. Just look at the example of Abraham in the book of Hebrews. His faith wasn't passive at all. He was actively moving toward a promise from God, this city which has foundations. His whole life was guided by that trust in something he couldn't even see yet.
So if salvation is a free gift, what's next? Well, that brings us right to part 2, from faith to works. And you gotta love this subtitle, the unavoidable consequence. It just suggests that something powerful and automatic is set in motion.
And here it is. This is the crucial shift in our thinking. Good works are not the cause of salvation, they are the effect of it. Think about it like a healthy apple tree. The tree doesn't produce apples to become a tree, it produces apples because it is a healthy tree. It's the natural outcome. In the same way, a truly changed heart can't help but produce good work.
This chart breaks it down perfectly. On the left, you've got salvation. It's a gift from God, it's received through faith, and it benefits your eternal life. Think of that as the vertical connection between you and God. And on the right, you've got good works. These are enabled by God but performed for others, and they benefit the world around us. That's the horizontal part. See the flow? It comes in, and then it goes out.
So, what do these good works actually look like? The source points to 3 key things. First, they are always designed to benefit other people. Second, let's be real.
This stuff doesn't come naturally to us. And third, and this is the real game changer, they are enabled by God. So it's not about just trying harder or mustering up more willpower. It's about allowing God to work through us.
Now for part 3, shining a light. Here, we're going to explore a really powerful metaphor that shows us what putting our faith into action really looks like in the world.
I mean, Jesus makes this connection crystal clear. He doesn't say, let people see your inner faith or let them see your deep thoughts. He says, let them see your good works. The actions themselves are the visible proof. They are the shining light of an invisible reality.
To really understand the light, you kind of have to understand the darkness. In this context, darkness isn't just about a lack of knowledge. It's described as a kind of spiritual blindness. And the light? That's the gospel of Christ. It's what cuts through that darkness and allows people to see clearly, maybe for the very first time. And this is the punchline of the whole metaphor. Good works are so much more than just random kind gestures. They are the tangible beams of light that make the gospel visible and real to a world that's in darkness. They are, quite literally, faith in action.
Okay, so we've covered the what and the why. For our final section, let's bring it all home. What does any of this mean for you and for me? Right here, right now. So, we've seen the flow. Salvation is the gift, and good works are the light that shines from it. The theory makes sense, right? But now, let's get personal with it.
Let's make this real. The question isn't if these two are connected in your life, but how. How does the reality of having received that free gift actually change the way you interact with the world? What does it empower you to do that you couldn't do before?
And that brings us to our final and maybe most crucial question. Knowing that good works aren't about earning salvation, but about reflecting it, what are some ways you can let your light shine? Because ultimately, our actions become the most powerful evidence of the gift we've received. The world isn't waiting to hear another lecture about the light. It's waiting to actually see it.